Billy Bob is on his fourth gun run over Baghdad when a missile comes off a rooftop. He never sees it. One second, he's lined up on a string of supply trucks. Next second, something rips past his left wing. So close, he feels the heat through the canopy. His hands snap the stick hard right. The A-10 rolls west, back toward friendly airspace. His heart is punching. His grip stays clean. In his headset, "Are you all right?" "Yeah." And then he turns around. He goes back in. That was Baghdad, April 6th, 2003. And if you want to understand why a pilot who just missed dying by about a foot pointed his jet back toward the people trying to kill him, you have to rewind about 40 minutes. Because this isn't just about nerves. It's about what this airplane was built to do, and why the Air Force spent years trying to get rid of it, right up until the day that decision almost cost 200 Americans their lives. The A-10 Warthog was never meant to look good on posters. It was built in the early 1970s for one job: stop Soviet tanks if they came through Western Europe. So they built the airplane around the gun, a GAU-8 Avenger, 30mm, big enough that the gun basically is the plane. They wrapped the cockpit in titanium. They put the engines high and apart, so one hit wouldn't kill both. And they kept it slow enough to actually see what you're shooting at. By the 1990s, that same design started sounding like a problem. No stealth, no speed. It lives down low, where modern air defenses can reach it. And the argument against it wasn't crazy. Fast jets can drop precision weapons from high altitude and disappear before anyone can respond. So why keep something that has to loiter inside the danger? The Air Force tried to retire the A-10 more than once. It survived, barely, every time. Then came April 6th, 2003, Baghdad, under a sandstorm so thick it swallowed the city. And on the south bank of the Tigris River, Task Force 269 was getting hammered by T-72 tanks from Saddam's 1st Hammurabi Republican Guard Division. They were running out of options. Fast jets couldn't tell a T-72 from a fuel truck in that visibility. They couldn't hang around. They couldn't slow down long enough to find anything. So the call went up for the Warthogs. And everything the Air Force said about the A-10's weaknesses was about to be tested, right in the place where it was supposed to fail. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond, Donk, Strasburger, and Captain Greg, Billy Bob Thornton were already in the air. They were circling above the weather, waiting for a break that wasn't coming. Then the radio cracked. The voice was First Lieutenant John "Coke" Blocher. And this is where the story shifts, because Coke wasn't calling from a command post. He was down on the ground, in the middle of it, taking fire. He was feeding them target info while also shooting back at muzzle flashes he could barely make out through the brown haze. Coke was also an A-10 pilot, so when he asked them to drop into that storm, he knew exactly what he was asking. He still asked, "If the Iraqis cross the bridge, it's over for us. We need help." Donk didn't debate it. He and Billy Bob tipped their noses down and went into the sandstorm. Visibility collapsed to almost nothing. The world outside turned into one solid sheet of brown. And then, seconds from impact, Baghdad finally appeared under them. Buildings, streets, and the dull line of the Tigris cutting north through the city. They followed the river. The bridge showed up fast. Donk went first. Flight lead goes first. And on this pass, his job wasn't to destroy anything. It was to mark the target, so Coke on the ground could confirm they were looking at the same spot before anyone started dumping rounds into the wrong place. The moment Donk crossed the river, Iraqi anti-aircraft opened up. 23mm cannons, the kind that can chew an A-10's wing if they connect. Tracers climbed through the storm in long, curving lines, searching for the sound of his engines more than the shape of his aircraft. Donk didn't break off. He pressed in, selected his smoke rockets, lined up on the eastern base of the bridge, and squeezed. Nothing. The pods were dead. Rockets stuck on the rails. No smoke, no mark. And now the bridge was rushing toward him with seconds to spare. No time to troubleshoot. No time to climb out and reset. No clean second attempt. So he took the only option left. He hit the flare release. a chain of bright flares scattered along the riverbank, hot enough to cut through the brownout, burning long enough to give Coke something real to lock onto. Donk yanked right and skimmed off over rooftops, AAA walking after him as he escaped back across the western bank. Down on the ground, Coke caught it. The flare glow, distant but unmistakable. Not smoke, not the plan, but he understood immediately what it meant. "Donk, you're clear to engage." It wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, but it was enough to start the next 40 minutes. Donk came back around with real firepower. By now the Iraqi gunners were ready. They couldn't see much, but they didn't need to. They fired at sound and timing, streams of tracers rising into the murk in overlapping arcs. Donk flew straight through it. He picked out a BMP, an armored personnel carrier, moving toward the bridge. He put the pipper on it and squeezed. The GAU-8 answered. That deep, tearing growl rolled through the storm, and the BMP came apart like it had been unzipped. Donk pulled up, turned west, and his cockpit lit up. Warning lights, multiple. For a split second, his brain went to the obvious place. I'm hit. He shoved away from the fight and ran a fast check. Controls, fuel flow, engines. Everything felt alive. The jet was flying clean. Then he found the problem. The ballistics computer was dead. The drop-compensated reticle, the system that calculates bullet drop and adjusts for speed, altitude, and wind, was gone. What he had left was a fixed crosshair, old-school aiming, low altitude, in a sandstorm under live AAA. He tried a reboot. Nothing. Here's what that means in real life. Every shot from here on out would require him to judge bullet drop in his head while the aircraft is moving, the air is dirty, and people are actively trying to kill him. The safe call was to leave. Let Billy Bob handle it. Nobody would question it. But Coke was still on the radio. You could hear gunfire behind his voice, and the tanks were still shelling across the river. Donk cleared Billy Bob for the next pass, and then Donk stayed. There's an argument that what he did next was reckless. A dead targeting computer isn't a nuisance. It's a real loss of precision. If his rounds landed wide, he wasn't just missing targets. He was throwing 30mm armor-piercing rounds near American troops. That argument isn't wrong. Donk knew it. He stayed anyway. Billy Bob didn't hesitate. D-Mob 7-2 in hot from the south. He dropped into the brownout, tracked the river north, and came in hard. First target, a T-72 sitting on the east edge of the bridge circle, hull down, still firing across the Tigris. Billy Bob put the crosshairs on the roof, the weakest armor on a tank, and held the trigger. Rounds punched through the top. Fire started pushing out of the hatches almost immediately. Got that sucker. He's right on the west edge of the circle, boss. He rolled around again. This time, the battlefield opened up just enough to show choices. An anti-aircraft gun, supply trucks, and another T-72 still active. His instinct went straight to the AAA. It was the most immediate threat to them. But the tanks were the threat to the guys on the ground. Every second a T-72 stayed alive, it was adding to the casualty count. So he made the ugly choice. He lined up on the second tank instead. Up above, Donk was doing a different kind of math. Their bingo fuel, the minimum fuel to get home safely, was calculated back on the ground before this became what it was, before low-altitude turns over Baghdad in a sandstorm. Fuel burns faster down low. Hard maneuvering, higher throttle. None of that lives in the neat numbers from a brief. Donk started running it in his head. Distance to the nearest field, current fuel state, burn rate at this altitude. He checked it once, then again. They had more margin than the computer said. Revise bingo down by 500. 500 pounds of fuel doesn't sound like much, but over that bridge, on that morning, it bought them minutes. And minutes were what Task Force 269 didn't have. Billy Bob came around for his fourth pass. This time it was the supply trucks, parked on the eastern bank, feeding the fight. He tracked the river, found the bridge in the haze, and started his run. AAA came up like it always did. By now, it was almost a rhythm. Tracers rising, his jet sliding through gaps, his eyes locked forward. What he couldn't train himself to see was one soldier on a rooftop with a man-pad. A shoulder-fired missile doesn't care about titanium. It doesn't care how tough the airplane looks. It just needs a lock. The tube kicked, the missile climbed. Billy Bob got no warning, no tone, no light. Nothing in the cockpit told him it was there. It tracked, then lost lock for a heartbeat, and blew past his left wing, close enough to feel. He broke hard right and ran west into friendly airspace. His pulse spiked. His hands stayed steady. "Are you all right?" A pause. Not long, just long enough. "Yeah." No extra words, no breathing space, because the trucks were still there. Coke was still down there, and he still had fuel. He turned around and went back in. That choice, quiet, almost casual on the radio, is the center of this story. Not the gun, not the storm, not the warnings. Just a guy who had every reason to leave, thinking for a few seconds, and deciding it didn't change the job. Nobody ordered him back. Nobody would have blamed him for calling it. He went back anyway. Billy Bob came back through the AAA and tore into the supply trucks. 30mm rounds stitched through cargo beds. Whatever those trucks were carrying, ammo, fuel, parts, caught and burned as he pulled off. "Got the trucks." "Copy, I'm going in." Donk rolled back toward the bridge. Still no ballistics computer, so he pivoted to something the dead system couldn't take away. A Maverick missile. He brought up the Maverick's seeker camera on his display. The Maverick doesn't need the gun's math. If he can see a target well enough to lock it, the missile guides itself. The problem was the same problem as everything else that day: visibility. Through the camera, it was mostly brown, blurred shapes, hard edges that came and went, the occasional straight line of a building cutting through the haze, and all of it under AAA. Donk held his run, scanned the screen, and found a BMP. He slewed the seeker, got the lock, fired. The missile dropped off the rail and drove down into it. Direct hit. That wasn't luck. That was a pilot squeezing a working tool out of a broken system and making it count. Down below, the math started to shift. For 40 minutes, the Hammurabi division had been taking losses. Tanks burning, BMPs ripped up, trucks destroyed. And with the Warthogs still overhead, staying in that open riverbank started costing more than it gained. The Iraqi armor on the eastern side began pulling back. Not a collapse, not a rout, just a retreat into the cover of the city. The shelling slowed. Then it stopped. Without the tanks backing them, the infantry pressure behind Task Force 269 started to fold too. The weight that had been building for hours finally began to lift. A voice came up from the ground. "You are making battalion and company commanders really happy right now." Donk heard it, logged it, kept flying. "Bob, one more run. Let's take these guns out." "Hell, it's about time." Billy Bob went after the AAA piece he'd been watching all day, the one he kept ignoring because tanks came first. Now the tanks were done. He lined up, fired, and shredded it. As he broke west, he still saw tracers from another gun climbing, missing his wingtips by not much. Donk caught it next, came in from the south, and ended it with a single burst. And just like that, the sky over the bridge went quiet. 40 minutes. That's how long they stayed over the bridge. Task Force 269 held the Muthanna Bridge. Minimal casualties, no armored vehicles lost. And the push across the Tigris, the one that could have broken the American position on that bank, never happened. "Coke, we're at bingo. How copy?" A beat. Then Coke came back, steadier now. "Copy that. Second flight of A-10s incoming. Guys down there send their regards. Good work." Another beat. "When I see you back home, drinks are on me." Donk and Billy Bob turned for home. Raymond, Donk, Strasburger, and Greg, Billy Bob Thornton received the Silver Star, one of the highest U.S. awards for valor in combat. John Coke Blocher received the Bronze Star and the Air Force Commendation Medal with Valor for what he did on the ground while talking them onto targets. All three made it home. And the A-10? The Air Force kept trying to retire it. Budget fights, capability reviews, the same argument that it's too slow and too exposed for modern air defenses. And the A-10 kept surviving those votes for the same reason it survived Baghdad. When things get messy up close, there still aren't many machines that do what it does. It's still flying today. The case against it was never dumb. Every weakness people point to, slow, low, inside the threat, showed up over Baghdad on April 6, 2003. And somehow, those same weaknesses were also the reason it worked when nothing else could. Whether that trait is worth it in the wars ahead, that's the harder question. But after what happened over the Tigris that morning, it got a lot harder to answer quickly. If you come here for stories like this, the ones that don't always make it into textbooks but decide the day anyway, consider subscribing. Not to build a channel, to build an archive. One moment at a time. More coming. See you on the next one.